Hello and welcome, friends. Today we are here for the second day of Maharana Pratap Annual Security Dialogue. Yesterday we had amazing discussions and a very enlightening discourse and dialogue in a very cross-disciplinary manner on the diverse aspects of terrorism. Ambassador Naur Gilan, Israel's ambassador to India, joined us as the chief guest and made some really interesting comments. Former Deputy NSA Shri Arvind Gupta Sahab also joined and made some very interesting observations. Mr. Yoram Schweitzer from Israel, former advisor to the Prime Minister of Israel, he also joined. General Hasnan and Ambassador Anil Tragunat Saab made very interesting observations about the future of terrorism and also assessed the global war on terror in terms of its success and failures. So today we are back here again on this very critical and sensitive issue with an amazing set of speakers. And in the inaugural session, the beginning session, we have one of the finest experts on terrorism, and he is Mr. Rohan Gunaratna. You must have heard his name, you must have read his articles. We all have grown up like studying terrorism and counterterrorism, reading his articles, policy briefs, and papers. And now today we are lucky to have him here with Usana's Foundation. Sir, it's really an honor to have you on board today with us. And he will be giving the keynote speech today as he is our chief guest. And Rohan Gunaratna sir will speak on Islamic State and Al Qaeda centric threat in in Asia. I'll just give a brief introduction of Gunaratna sir, though he needs no introduction, and we can just go on and on with the kind of work that he has done. But I'll just briefly give an introduction. Rohan Gunaratna sir is Director General, Institute of National Security Studies, Ministry of National Security, Sri Lanka, and Professor of Security Studies, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. He received his master's from the University of Notre Dame in the US, where he was Hesburgh Scholar, and his doctorate from the University of St. Andrews in the UK, where he was British Chevening Scholar, a former senior fellow at Combating Terrorism Center at the United States Military Academy at West Point, and at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. Gunaratna was invited to testify on the structure of Al Qaeda before the 9/11 Commission. The author of Inside Al Qaeda Global Network of Terror, Gunaratna edited the Insurgency and Terrorism series of Imperial College Press, London. He is a trainer for national security agencies, law enforcement authorities, and military counterterrorism units. Interviewed terrorists and insurgents in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, Saudi Arabia, and other conflict zones. For advancing international security cooperation, Professor Gunaratna received Major General Rolf H. von Damon Award. So welcome, sir. And I must tell you, you won't find an intelligence chief in Asia who is not trained by Rohan Gunaratna, sir. So really, if you want to have an insight that brings the very finest blend of a practitioner's expertise and an academic insight, then Rohan Gunaratna, sir, is the man who we must listen to, we must read his articles and look forward to. Sir, over to you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I had visited Afghanistan many times, and I had visited Iraq twice. So my presentation today is going to focus on very much the observations that I made during my visits, as well as my debriefings of Al Qaeda and Islamic State members in Afghanistan, in Bagram, in Afghanistan, and also in Camp Cropper in Iraq. So I want to give you a presentation that focus on the what happened in Afghanistan and in Iraq. So if you look at the evolution of global terrorism, its origins can be traced back to 1968. And after 68, international terrorism evolved into something called global terrorism. 68 was the genesis of international terrorism because of globalization, we saw that these threat groups assumed a dimension to operate beyond their territorial borders. And after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, that is in 79, and of course the Iranian Revolution, Muslims believed that they can capture state power. They can capture state power. So What we saw was the defeat of the Soviets in Afghanistan eventually led to the collapse of the Soviet Empire. And of course, there was no rehabilitation program of those Muslims that fought against the Soviets. And as a result of that, we saw that the same people decided to attack the United States. So if you look at the first significant attack in the US was 1993. Just 2 years after the Soviet forces withdrew, the same group, that is the Al-Qaeda group, Ramzi Ahmad Yusuf, the nephew of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, staged the attack on the World Trade Center. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed later became the mastermind of the 9/11 attack. In fact, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed sent money to Ramzi Ahmad Yusuf in 1993 to mount an attack against the World Trade Center in 1993. So you can say in many ways that the furnace or the radicalization for the contemporary global terrorism was the anti-Soviet multinational Afghan Mujahideen campaign from 79 to 89. There's no dispute about it. So let me also share with you that Al-Qaeda was formed in 1988, August 11th. That is just before the fight ended in Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda was formed in Peshawar. Abdullah Azam was the main ideologue. Bin Laden created the organization with the current head of Al-Qaeda, that is Dr. Aiman al-Zawahiri, who is from Egypt, and he came from the Egyptian Islamic Jihad. So, in fact, Al-Qaeda is a creation of the Egyptians working together with the Saudis. 60 to 70% of the members of Al-Qaeda were Saudis and Yemenis, but the most brilliant people, the directing figures of Al-Qaeda, they were all Egyptians. So I want to share with you that Al-Qaeda became the vanguard of the Islamic State, the most significant terrorist organization to make a difference. And of course, Al-Qaeda was named the pioneering vanguard of the Islamic movement by its creators. And what is important to understand is that the 9/11 attack galvanized all the Islamist movements around the world. Why? Because they attacked the United States. After having defeated the Soviets, the Islamists demonstrated that they can even attack the most powerful country in the world, which is the United States. And by staging 9/11, by attacking America's most iconic landmark, which is the World Trade Center, and 2 planes targeted the World Trade Center. Another plane hit the Pentagon, and the last plane was flying to hit the Congress, because the White House is very difficult to target, covered by trees and all that. Capitol Hill is on a hill. So this was the plan of Al-Qaeda, and they succeeded to a large extent because they gave life to threat groups around the world. Not only that, Al-Qaeda had trained, Taliban hosted 30 different groups from Asia, Africa, Middle East, and also Muslims from Europe and North America and Australia in Afghanistan from 96 to 2001 until October, when the Americans intervened in Afghanistan. When the Americans intervened in Afghanistan, one of the most capable jihadists, terrorists, Abu Musab al-Zakawi, who was in Herat in Afghanistan, moved to Iran. He went to Mashhad, went to Tehran, and went to the north of Iraq and created the Islamic State. Of course, it was not known as the Islamic State at that time. He created the genesis or the seed of the Islamic State called the Tawheed wal Jihad. Tawheed wal Jihad evolved into the Mujahideen Shura Council, and Mujahideen Shura Council became the Islamic State of Iraq, and Islamic State of Iraq became Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. And in July 2014, the group was known as Islamic State of the Islamic State. So today, I have seen many Western scholars, even Indian scholars, referring to this group as ISIS. There's no group called ISIS. ISIS changed its name in July 2014. So don't use the old name, use the real name, the now name. It is called the Islamic State. For example, Al-Qaeda was known as Maktab al-Qidamat. So no one uses the word Maktab al-Qidamat to identify Al-Qaeda. They just call it Al-Qaeda. So my suggestion to Indian scholars is use the correct term, which is the Islamic State, which is the current name of this group. Now, the Islamic State became the most powerful group, much more powerful than Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was a kindergarten kid. If you compare Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, Islamic State had about 60,000 fighters and families that came through Turkey. I'm quoting the figure from the Turkish intelligence of the foreign fighters and the family members came. The Americans rate this figure to around 40,000. It may very well be correct because the US figure was of the fighters. The Turkish figure is fighters plus family members. So I want to share with you that it became the largest threat group in the world. But Islamic State is not the most violent group. Al-Qaeda is not the most violent group. Can you tell me the most violent group in the world, the most violent terrorist and insurgent group in the world? Can anyone tell me the name of that group? It is a challenge for all of you, especially to the Indian community of scholars. No, someone said it is LTT. Certainly, LTT is the most innovative group, but the most violent group is the Taliban. So if you look at the number of deaths, the number of maimings and the number of injuries, the most violent group in the world is the Taliban. Taliban, the US fought, US-led Western coalition fought the Taliban. And of course, they raised the army of 350,000 Afghan police and Afghan military. I never met the will to fight in them. They were very well equipped. In fact, today Taliban is the best equipped terrorist and insurgent group in the world. And even the Indians misassessed the Taliban. In fact, I recall my Indian colleagues saying that saying that the Afghan military and police can take on these threats. And if I'm not mistaken, the Indians shared this assessment with the Americans also. The Taliban, the Afghan police and the army will be able to fight the Taliban. They were absolutely wrong because they didn't assess the conceptual or what is called the morale of the Taliban. What today matters is not the size of the armies. What matters is the will and the skill to fight. So if you look at the return of the Taliban, it is not the return of just the Taliban. I would say it is the return of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda alliance. So with the return of Taliban, August 15, 2021, we saw about 28 groups from Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. They pledged allegiance, or they congratulated, or they welcomed the return of the Taliban. And almost all those groups, they are groups that had received training from 96 to 2001 in Afghanistan. So the developments in Afghanistan, I would say the developments in Afghanistan is the return of Taliban and Al-Qaeda alliance. And if you must understand the threat landscape in Afghanistan today, and if you must understand the threat landscape today globally, it is very important for all of us to look at what is happening in Afghanistan, because Afghanistan is going to shape the global landscape. I will give you just one example. Easter Sunday attack in Sri Lanka. The terrorist who communicated the Easter Sunday attack to Islamic State Central and got Amak to publicize it, he told something very important during a debriefing to a scholar who will speak to you later today, that is to Dr. Malhettiarachi. He said that I'm going to Afghanistan because it is in Afghanistan where there is pure and pristine Islam being preached. So he referred to Nangarhar. That is where the Islamic State has created the seed. So Afghanistan is the battlefield, most important battlefield of the jihadists. It has been. It is the furnace of radicalization. It is from where Al-Qaeda emerged. And today, with the representation and the presence of at least 30 groups, foreign terrorist groups from Asia, Africa, Middle East in Afghanistan, Afghanistan will emerge again as a very important epicenter. There are some very romantic people. They say that Taliban has changed. This is Taliban 2.0. Yes, it is a different Taliban, but the ideology of Taliban has not changed. I want to share with you, Taliban continues to accommodate the foreign threat groups, mostly the Al-Qaeda centric threat groups. And of course, Taliban is now fighting the Islamic State Khorasan province in Afghanistan. So as long as there's fighting, as long as there is conflict, I would see that there will be foreign fighters that will travel not only to join the Taliban Al-Qaeda alliance, but also will join the Islamic State Khorasan province. And as a result of the flow of foreign fighters, these terrorist groups will build their capabilities and they will return back to their home countries in Asia, Africa, Middle East, and the West. And they will create cells, networks, and groups that will pose a global security threat. So this is how I would frame and project the threat posed in Afghanistan in the immediate 1 to 2 years, in the next 5 years, and the long term, which is the 10 years. Let me make a few concluding remarks for your consideration. Number one, who failed in Afghanistan? I would say that the Western militaries have the best armies in the world. If you look at the US and the European armies, they're 10 to 20 years more advanced than the Indian army. But you can see that even they failed in Afghanistan. Why did they fail? It is because of many reasons. One is that they failed to build the fighting will, the will to hunt and kill, the will to be ruthless against your enemy. And as long as you don't have the hunting mentality, you can't fight. And I want to share with you that the Afghan military and police collapsed like a pack of cards. Why did they do that? It is because there was no morale to fight. So in the future, you can say even the best militaries, even the largest militaries will fail unless they are led by those leaders with the will and the skill to fight. This is the single most important lesson we can draw from the lessons of Iraq and the lessons of Afghanistan. Iraq also is an incomplete war. Islamic State, certainly Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was killed in 2019, but the group persists. In Afghanistan, Taliban is the first insurgent terrorist actor in the 21st century to capture power, to return to power, to become a state actor. So this is the first key point I want to share with you. The second key point I want to share with you is the threat to the region and the threat to the world. I think I have elaborated. It is not the return of the Afghan Taliban. It is the return of the Taliban Al-Qaeda alliance. I myself have mapped at least 30 groups that have congratulated, welcomed, or pledged allegiance to the Taliban. and most of them are Al-Qaeda-centric groups. These groups will pose a preeminent threat to the global security community. The third aspect is one of tackling Muslim exclusivism, extremism, and terrorism at a global level. This is a global challenge. First, wherever Salafi Wahhabism went, in the last 30 years, there were terrorist attacks. First, the Salafi Wahhabis attacked fellow Muslims. After that, they attacked the so-called unbelievers, the non-Muslims. So I would ask all of you, stop the spread of Salafi Wahhabism. If you want peace in your own country, it is spreading everywhere in India. It has spread everywhere in Sri Lanka, like a cancer. That is why we had the Easter Sunday attack. So yesterday I had an Indian scholar who visited me, and she said, in Kerala, in northern Kerala, there is a place where they are all wearing black and they are preaching Salafi Wahhabism. So I said that Kerala, you will see terrorism in the coming months and coming years. And in fact, I told her a very interesting story. I said in 77, Sri Lanka opened its economy and we start to send Sri Lankans to the Gulf. They came with the Salafi Wahhabism. And then people got radicalized. They started to dress differently. They start to eat differently. They start to preach differently. And some of them even rejected vaccines. So this Muslim radicalization, we have to stop it. If we don't stop it, we will have violence. It is not Salafi Wahhabism, but also Jamaat Islami. So we have seen very significant spread of Jamaat Islami ideology, and all those who are arrested in Sri Lanka after Easter Sunday, they were either Salafi Wahhabis or they were from the Jamaat Islami group. So the key is to promote local and traditional Islam. There's a very beautiful form of Islam, and I would say the smiling face of Islam. Spread it by law, develop a legal policy and operational framework, even if you are a democracy or not, especially if you are a democracy, to get rid of these extremist ideologies. Otherwise, terrorism will continue, and the terrorism and extremism and exclusivism will be fed by these ideologies in the world. Of course, Taliban is a Deobandi group, but it became more like a Salafi Wahhabi group because of the Al-Qaeda alliance. So what I want to share with you is we have to deal with Muslim exclusivism. Muslims should integrate with the other communities. Otherwise, they will use ideologies such as al-wala wal-bara. Al-wala wal-bara means loyalty to Muslims or love for Muslims and hatred to non-Muslims. Not all Muslims. I can share with you about 30% of the Muslims receive different degrees of radicalization in Sri Lanka. 10% very significantly radicalized. That is why we have banned about a dozen groups that are Salafi Wahhabis who claim that they were preaching pure and pristine Islam. So I have told them we don't need pure and pristine Islam, but we need the beautiful face of Islam that can coexist with other communities. So this is a global fight. This is a global challenge. I would say that in the early 21st century, we have seen the surge of Muslim exclusivism, extremism, cascading to terrorism. And there were two epicenters. One is Afghanistan, other is Iraq and Syria. Today, the Afghan center has become revitalized and re-energized. And there is no appetite, even on the part of the Indians or other countries, to intervene in Afghanistan. So I would say that we all have to work together to build an intelligence alliance from UAE to Japan to monitor Afghanistan. Because when the threat increases and when the attacks start to be too late to intervene in Afghanistan, if we don't have good visibility into the developments in Afghanistan. So let me conclude my presentation by saying that there are many threats. Terrorism is not the only threat the world is facing. We have geopolitics and foreign intervention. We have serious and organized crime. We have fissile and missile proliferation, a range of threats, but terrorism still remains an apex threat. And more than terrorism, it is exclusivism and extremism that requires integration and assimilation. So I would ask all of you to focus on building the capabilities. For example, capabilities in community engagement, capabilities in rehabilitation. I believe that Dr. Mal Hettiarachi will speak to you later on how to rehabilitate a terrorist. So I think that these are the skills that our militaries, law enforcement, and intelligence services do not have. I would ask all of you to build those skills that will prevent these threat groups reaching the terrorism phase. We should be able to deal with these groups in their first phase, which is exclusivism, second phase, which is extremism. Terrorism phase is too late to deal. If you try to deal in the terrorism phase, you have already lost the fight. I thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions you have.
So, thank you very much for this very honest, clear, and straightforward elucidation of your thoughts. I mean, I feel that this kind of honesty is much needed in the intellectual world and the policy making world. So, I have an observation and a few questions, not many. Uh, like as you mentioned, Salafi Wahhabism is a big threat, but I find that because of the Salafi Wahhabism, like it has started some kind of a competition even among the other groups like Barelvis also, just to prove themselves as more pure, austere, and becoming more and more radical. Like in Pakistan, Tehreek-e-Labbaik movement, which is a Barelvi group, but I mean, it exceeds anyone else in terms of its extremism and radicalism. Taliban is a Deobandi group. We have Deobandi segments in India also, which are becoming more and more like Salafi in their attitudes and behavior. Even in Kerala, some of the Sufi non-Salafi groups are becoming moving towards the extremism. So it seems that it has started some kind of a race. I mean, just to prove themselves as a little more towards the pure side. In Kashmir, we found that not just the people who are religious or people who are belonging to some particular sect, but some highly educated people. I can like show you the tweets of some highly educated journalists, writers, praising Taliban as some kind of a victor against the forces of oppression. So that's the case. And my question is that in this ISKP, how far do you see that Pakistan has a role in patronizing this organization and the overall status of Pakistan and the future of Pakistan, especially when it comes to nurturing the terror groups in South Asia? Because Sri Lanka, India, we are going to be equally affected. So I guess and Pakistan has a major role to play.
First point is this: don't be so phobic of Pakistan. Pakistan terrorism itself increased 33% last year. You see, in the lead up to the return of the Taliban and after the Taliban return, Pakistan itself is suffering a lot from terrorism. But certainly in Pakistan, the capacity to deal with terrorism is limited. I will be very honest with you. The Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, as you mentioned, the Barelvi group, right? It is a Barelvi group, but still it's become a very violent organization. And of course, the group was banned by Imran Khan, but after another series of violence, he delisted the group. Because the group is now the 5th largest political party in Punjab. Right? So you can see the difficulty of dealing with Muslim radicalization and these Muslim extremist groups. So I think that Pakistan itself is going to suffer a lot with Taliban. And you can see now the clash between the Taliban and Pakistan. These groups develop their own momentum after some time and they will not listen to Pakistan. See? So I have sent a very clear message to the Sri Lankan authorities and the Sri Lankan government. I said, do not recognize Taliban, because when Taliban came to office, came to power, there was some lobbying in Sri Lanka for recognition of Taliban. And I appeared on a television called Derana and I said, this is what Taliban has done. Do not entertain that thought. And I said, anyone who is praising Taliban, immediately take them for investigation to see whether they have links to Taliban. I would ask the Indians to do the same. So if any scholar or if anyone is praising Taliban, please immediately get the Indian government to investigate them. It is key for you to do that. If you don't do that, certainly these extremist ideologies will spread in your own country. My suggestion is for you to work very closely with Pakistan, despite the difficulties you have. Cooperate and collaborate with Pakistan on at least some aspects of terrorism, especially on the Islamic State Khorasan province. Islamic State Khorasan province is not sponsored by the Pakistani services, and I think it will be a huge mistake for anyone to say that. Islamic State Khorasan is sponsored by Islamic State Central, which is in Iraq and Syria. I have interviewed many members of Islamic State, and I have found no credible evidence to that allegation. And I think that we have to be very clear in this matter. Governments do sponsor terrorist groups, and governments pay a very heavy price for it. All of you know what Indian services did from 1983 to 1987. India armed, trained, financed the Tamil Tigers. The first batch of Tamil Tigers were trained in Uttar Pradesh, in Chakrata, north of Dehradun. Right? Second batch trained in Himachal Pradesh. Eight other batches, including Danu, the woman who killed Rajiv Gandhi, she was trained also in Tindugal. I have a photograph of her wearing Indian camouflage uniform and carrying a Tamil Tiger flag. So my advice to the world is be very careful of meddling with these groups. If you meddle with these groups, they will come back to bite you. So it is a message not only to Pakistan, but it's a message to every country to not to do that, because we ourselves have seen what happened. Terrorism is terrorism, and we should deal with terrorism as it is. These extremist ideologies, also we have to deal with it as it is. We should not permit any extremist ideology saying we are a democracy, we can't deal with exclusivism, extremism. This mindset has to change. You have to take a very tough stand, a tough position against these ideologies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Namaskar. It was really amazing to listen to you. It was an enlightening session for you. And once again, I would say it's an honor, it's a pleasure to have you today with us. And we look forward to inviting you more often in the future. Now, I'll be beginning our next, the first session, first module of the session one, that is radicalization in South Asia. And we have Dr. Nand Kishore as the moderator for this session. So I'll just over to you, Dr. Nand Kishore. From here, you will have to take charge.
Thank you, Mr. Abhinay, and it was great listening to Dr. Gunaratna so far. I think an excellent beginning for the day, and it's my pleasure to chair this particular session. My special thanks to Sanas Foundation for this opportunity to chair Maharana Pratap Annual Security Dialogue. And this session is on, as it was mentioned, radicalization in South Asia. Without wasting much time, we have in order Dr. Tara Kartha, we have Michael Kugelman, and then we also have Sri Pratap Heblikar, and then last will be Arvind Acharya. Now, I take this opportunity to introduce the first speaker, because the subject that we're talking here is directly connected to most of the students and the scholars and followers who are keen in listening to terrorism and radicalization and the way things are happening in South Asia itself. So it brings a very interesting formulation here to listen to scholars who have been working for a very long time, and different perspectives to give us a flavor of how things are moving in South Asia, more so with the specific components of radicalization itself, because this has been seen having a spillover effect since the beginning of ISIS, and then suddenly we see a lot of people going from here, getting motivated, getting recruited. A lot of things have happened from here. So it has push and pull factors. There are a lot of domestic components also associated with it, but there are also these transnational components of it. It has also got globalized. Perhaps we will listen more from the experts here. The first speaker is Dr. Tara Kartha. She has spent 17 years at the National Security Council Secretariat. She sits at the apex of India's national security architecture. At the NSCS, she worked on terrorism and other security relating issues relating to the neighborhood and held special charge of the National Security Advisory Board, NSAB, among other responsibilities that she already was holding. Earlier, she was at the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis for 8 years, where she authored her book, Tools of Terror, Light Weapons and India's Security. She was also a consultant for the UN non-governmental expert group of small arms and light weapons, and a resource person for the National Defense College Delhi and College of Combat Mohave. In addition to being a member of the Council for Security and Cooperation in the Asia Pacific, that is CACAP, and Pagwash, India. It's a pleasure to have you here, ma'am, and over to you.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be with you all today. And I know this is, you have some excellent speakers, I think, on the panel, including, I think, Mr. Kugelman and others. So it's going to be a nice session. So I'm going to go, I think I have 15 minutes, right? So I will just go very quickly over what you've given me, which is radicalism in Asia. Now, when I start, I just want to take exception to just want to point out something which Dr. Gunaratna has said about Islamic State not being sponsored in Pakistan. I would say there is a section of the Islamic State which is definitely receiving support from Pakistan, and that is shown in investigations. I mean, that is there. This the recent, I would suggest you look at the case of the Umar Nisar module, which was recently seized in Kashmir. And all that investigation, I think, is available on the National Investigation Agency site. It's an extensive investigation, and it leads straight to a person called Ejaz Ahangar, if I'm not mistaken, who was an Islamic State terrorist, but was earlier in Pakistan for years, married there, and sorry, who was married there, and then was arrested by the Taliban, released inadvertently, and is back in the Islamic State. So I would really caution you on making such a sweeping statement that the evidence which we have, it doesn't indicate that. So let's just go to the fact that I'll just bullet point this so that we go over this very quickly. I think India has escaped radicalization more or less because, well, we have a very large and varied Muslim population, which is, which is, apart from the Sufism, the Deobandi, the Barelvi, and all those divisions, there are also divisions in terms of caste, of rich and poor, and very strong cultural overlays. For example, the Islam which you see in Kerala is quite different from the Islam which you see in the UP, or, for example, in Hyderabad. I mean, there is a whole strong cultural overlay, and over the years, a mix in between Hindu beliefs and Muslim beliefs. So it's a very interesting thing to see that especially in Kerala, you find a lot of the things that you're following, the rituals, also sometimes tends to get into the Muslim religion. Second thing, I think also, which is common to Hinduism and Islamic, the thing is the issue of caste. Caste continues to dominate both religions, especially Hinduism, I think. So therefore, there is not one unified Islamic opinion. Now, in fact, what is interesting is that for decades, nobody in the rest of India was least interested in the Kashmir issue, for example. And nobody went there to assist or anything, but that has changed in recent years due to a very, very aggressive mobilization on the internet and social media platforms. In fact, that is the main trend which you're seeing nowadays, is very, very aggressive mobilization. So if we take a metric of what is about Islamic radicalization, how bad is it? One metric is how many people are joining the Islamic State or the Al-Qaeda, and admittedly those are very low. I mean, the height was about, I think, 2014 to 15. And in, I think in through 21, there was just one or two modules, one module of Islamic State, large one, which was uncovered again in Kerala, but which crossed over into another 4 states and was fairly extensive, but it was hardly that common. Then there were these small so-called Islamic State cadres being caught. I'm not sure if they were Islamic State at all. They believed in the Islamic State ideology, but they were not really part of the Islamic State. Al-Qaeda modules were caught, including one this year in Lucknow. The interesting part is that in Kashmir, none of these have made any headway. The traditional groups have maintained their hold, showing that there is a degree of financial competition between these, because they don't want the Islamic State coming in and lording it over them. So you'll find fights breaking out between so-called Islamic State modules, Al-Qaeda modules, and the not so much local, the Lashkar-e-Taiba and others. So, but like I said just now, we saw this Umar Nisar module, which I would urge anyone to look at because it's a very interesting one, which was busted in November 2021, if I remember right. And it shows a very extremely interesting set of, what shall I say, set of happenings which occurred and which is completely cross-border. It is from India to Pakistan to Afghanistan. And another part is, of course, the fact that Indians are definitely fighting in Syria. I mean, this for us is something very, very unusual. We've never had, like I said, Indians never went to Kashmir, but over the last 3, 4, 5 years, we've had Indians going to Syria and Afghanistan. Some of them are still there. The advantage I think we had was that many of them came back and they were very, very disenchanted with what they saw. It was nothing at all like the caliphate that they were promised in Syria. But the thing is that call to hijrah, that has raised a lot of religious sentiments. People felt it is their duty to go and assist. So a lot of doctors, engineers, I mean, these are all educated people who went. But once again, I will say that the police use some very imaginative techniques, bringing in parents, bringing in counseling, bringing them back to their houses. And so over time, this seems to have paid off, for now at least. Now, if we look under these 3 heads, numbers and externalizing and the sheer places which Indians have gone or the South Asians have gone, if you look the same at Pakistan, is quite different. In Pakistan, numbers are very, very high. And the fact that Pakistanis are involved in almost every single terrorist attack in recent years. Now that is not something which you can check. It is when I know that when an Indian says it, it sounds like propaganda, but it is not, right? It is a fact that they are involved in France, in the US, in the France bombings. They've all been there, not in very great numbers, but you had the unnerving thing of a person from Punjab going there, getting killed, and his entire family praising him for what he did. So that is very frightening. And now reportedly in Kazakhstan, where the Tablighi Jamaat is supposed to be involved together with some Afghans, quote unquote Afghans, who are said to be part of the riots recently in Kazakhstan. So that for us is something which we have to be very mindful of, because there is a trend towards the radicalism in Pakistan is well beyond in a few dozen or something. It is seeped right to the very top, I would say. I have written about this recently, that the radicalism has become part and parcel of Pakistan's political ideology, its political commitments, and the way it sees the world. I mean, you had, for example, Imran Khan's recent statement after the Taliban takeover that the end of slavery. I mean, that's what he called it. I mean, so there is, to my mind, this whole radical philosophy has seeped right up to the very top. And for us, why is it dangerous? Because there will be a mirroring on our side of the border, and that is already occurring. For me, that is the biggest problem. I mean, Pakistan can do what it likes, but I don't want to see this mirrored in my own country. Now, we often talk of, because of this fact that terrorism, and when you say terrorism, you tend to tie it to radicalism, that, radicalism taken to violent limits becomes terrorism, and you only see it as Islamic terrorism, which is not. There's plenty of other stuff as well. In India, the fact that all this is tied to, people outside the country, and the fact that there are NGOs in the US, in Europe, and many parts of the world who are pushing the debate. And it's a very, very interesting network, which has, for example, the Jamaat-e-Islami involved in one very large network which pushes this agenda. That leads us to think that this whole externalizing this radicalism thing, which is not correct, because there is a significant internal aspect as well. So this is that is also probably why Delhi sees this the whole as something which has to be dealt with by diplomats, by people who can handle this narrative. But so it is part of it. I mean, for example, if you want to do a PhD abroad, if you do a PhD on Kashmir, you're more likely to get funding than otherwise. So nobody is interested, for example, I've seen nobody is interested in the POK aspect, nobody is interested in Gilgit-Baltistan. It's always about Kashmir. So there is a tendency to see that we are being sort of pushed to the wall by this kind of very strong interwoven NGO plus officials kind of a thing, which then spills over into Congress. So that there is a tendency, therefore, to say this is an external phenomenon, but it is not. In Pakistan, for example, now I'm taking the same thing in terms of Pakistan, is that they tend to see the whole thing also as external, which is a little strange, because the debate, when you come to the debate on what is radicalism, there's a tendency to blame everybody in terms of foreign agencies who are sponsoring this. This is not correct. This is what actually we are doing. We are helping to fight terrorism, and this is what people are saying. We are radical. This is unfair. That is the externalizing again, even in Pakistan, where they don't see that the problem is internal. And why is it internal in India and Pakistan? Is that there is no great debate within India or Pakistan on what ails Muslims in either country. There should be. I mean, that is one of the things which I'm hoping there will be. When I say debate, I'm talking of not highly theological debate. I'm talking of debate among normal people, talking of what are the problems for women, what are the problems in terms of Islamic law. Also, on the other side, what are the issues which affect Islam today? I mean, where should it be? What is the direction in which it should be going? In fact, the only debate seems to come from TV serials like Ertugrul and Barbaroslar. I know many of you have seen that, very, very nice serials, all of which glorifies the Ottoman Empire and arises from some Turkey's somewhat desperate attempt to get itself a place in the Ummah. So Turkey itself is in grief, but its serials are doing very well. The same, of course, applies to Bollywood's rendition of India's heroes. It's all glorified and there's very little sense in it. So the problem is the lack of a debate either on Islam or Hinduism in terms of how it should deliver in the modern era. How should it? My question would be, how does Hinduism help me to get a better state? How do we help get a better society? Does it help? If it does, and it does. One of the fundamental tenets of Hinduism is accountability. If you see Ram Raja, what is Ram Raja? Ram Raja is all about the king's accountability to the people. So that kind of a debate is missing in both countries, and therefore the radical groups occupy that vacuum and take full advantage and present their own doctored interpretation. When I say radical groups on both religions. So now, coming from that, I'm going to very quickly come to this question of hate crimes in India. Now, when we come to this, to my dismay, I found that there has been a 300% rise in hate crimes since the BJP came to power. That's what I saw in a very well-researched paper. And that the states, BJP-ruled states, have the largest such incidences. Then, of course, you had the organizers of the recent Haridwar Dharam Sansad, which was, well, it was sickening to say the least. And it is nothing of what Hinduism is really about. And that is not Hinduism. I don't know what it is, but it is not. But the good thing is that there has been a lodging of FIRs against them following this. And there, I think there is a special investigation team being set up. So it is being taken apparently in a serious manner. But of course, these people, these organizers have now decided to hold a huge rally on the 16th of January to protest what they call that they are being sort of, saying that that the alleging, for example, that the Uttarakhand government was scared of jihadis, and that's why they are acting against them. I mean, that is ridiculous. But I'm happy also to see that about 28 diaspora groups from around the world have been taking part in exerting pressure on the Indian government at the global level. That's not a bad thing at all, because at least it helps in keeping such kind of crazy people at bay. It's the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. Equally disgusting, of course, is the attacks on Muslims, making them, kneel down, say Ram. I mean, it is sickening for someone like me who has never seen these things before. We've never ever had this in India before. So it's a tragedy, especially because Muslims and Indians live quite comfortably together in much of India, barring a few states. Now, having said that, I have one problem. Now, we are looking at this as an academic, right? So we need to look at how is this counted? Look at the hate crimes being counted. You don't, for example, right now I'm sitting in Kerala, where I find people like there's a person called P.A. Fazal Ghafoor. He's the president of the Muslim Educational Society, who says the most terrible things, right? He is a practicing neurologist, for heaven's sake. So he's an educated person. And he has colleges and hostels all over Kerala and in parts of the Middle East as well. In fact, he comes across as somebody who's very liberal, but when you look at his speeches, it is completely, these are hate speeches which he delivers at various times. Now that is not reported, right? So you have many instances where people like these are calling out for the blood of Hindus, calling out that Islam should not, they should be, but in fact, even for example, there is a priest we're talking of Christians here, who said that half of India should be made Christian. I mean, these are all weird things which people say and which just goes unnoticed. Then another priest was arrested. Now, when I say priest, these are from churches which you would never ever have heard of. I mean, these are beliefs or denominations there are hundreds and hundreds of them in Kerala. So he made a speech calling for targeting the Hindu community. Again, not counted. So you see, in particular, there is another instance which for years, the Christian, I say Christian, I say it loosely, I'm talking of all these denominations who have usurped land, very, very sensitive land in the Western Ghats. And, they've just built these churches. This was also including the Sabrimala, holy land of the Hindus, which these people grabbed and took it and said, we're going to build churches. And when the local district magistrate acted against them, the whole lot came down and it became a huge political scandal and it was stopped. So my point is that while one aspect is reported, the attacks of the majority are not reported. That is a problem when you come to look at where is the radicalism coming from. It is action, reaction sort of a thing. None of this means that attacking Muslims in UP is okay, and it does not. It doesn't mean that at all. But what it does mean is that what it needs is a closer look at how we are counting hate crimes. I mean, hate crimes from both sides. You need to look at both. Then you get a correct picture. And it's also, but then I think my time is up. So
yeah, ma'am. I think, if you can conclude.
Yeah. So
that would be nice.
We need to look at the other and one is us. I mean, this is completely alien to Hinduism. Our advantage is that we don't have a book religion. Of radical of Hinduism. It doesn't exist religion. But we really need a debate, and I'm so glad Usana's foundation has raised this. We need a debate on how each religion can cope with the modern system, and scholars and religious community need to talk to each other and get this going, because otherwise this is not good. There's going to be the tendency in India, the slide in Pakistan is extremely apparent, but we also have to acknowledge that there is a problem in India. It is not just external, there is a political mobilization along these lines, which is dangerous for all of us and dangerous to the idea of India. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I think excellent presentation, very well taken. What you highlighted was very, very clear on externalizing radicalization is not the only way. Probably we have to look much more deeper into the internal component of it, which is directly aiding to the idea of radicalization. And then also your quest for debate on Islam fitting into the modern era, or for that matter, any religion. And also you highlighted certain major issues that are associated with any form of extremism when religion is used for other purposes is well taken. I think there will be very interesting questions when we have the Q&A at the end. Without wasting much time, I would love to introduce now the next speaker, Mr. Michael Kugelman. He is the Asia Program Deputy Director and Senior Associate for South Asia, the Woodrow Wilson Center, where he is responsible for research, programming, and publications on the region. His main specialty is Pakistan, India, and Afghanistan, and US relations with each of them. Mr. Kugelman writes monthly columns for Foreign Policy South Asia Channel and monthly commentaries for War on the Rocks. He also contributes regular pieces to the Wall Street Journal's think tank blog. He has published op-eds and commentaries in the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Politico, CNN.com, Bloomberg View, Diplomat, Al Jazeera, National Interest, and many other very interesting places. He has been interviewed by numerous major media outlets, including New York Times, Washington Post, Financial Times, Guardian, Christian Science Monitor, National Geography, BBC, CNN, and many more. He has also produced a number of longer publications in South Asia, including the edited volumes Pakistan's Interminable Energy Crisis, Is There Any Way Out? Pakistan's Runaway Urbanization, What Can Be Done? India's Contemporary Security Challenges, and then a few more. He has also published policy briefs, journal articles, and book chapters on issues ranging from Pakistani youth and social media to India's energy security strategy and transboundary water management in South Asia. Mr. Kugelman received his MA in Law and Diplomacy from the Fletcher School of Tufts University. He received his BA from American University School of International Service. It's a pleasure to have you, Mr. Kugelman. Over to you for the next 15 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Nanda, and thank you to the Usanas Foundation for having me. And I want to recognize in particular my friend, Dr. Abhinav Pandya, for inviting me to this very important session, and it's an honor to be on this panel. It was great to hear Tara Kartha's really rich, substantive presentation, which will be a really hard act to follow, but I'll try to complement it and fill in some gaps as I can. But before I share my brief reflections, I think it's important for me to put out an important caveat. I think that it is essential that when we scholars and analysts discuss the issue of radicalization, that we be humble in our approach. And why need we be humble? Well, that's because there is so much that we still don't know. After all these years of studying radicalization, there are still many unknowns about the drivers of radicalization. Now, for instance, there is no clear consensus in the academic scholarly literature about the main causes of radicalization. Now, certainly, there are many factors that lead people to become radicalized: alienation, poverty, xenophobia, mental illness, and so on and so forth. But we don't know which ones were the strongest causes. And likewise, there's no strong consensus within the literature on the type of profile that makes one most likely to be prone to radicalization. Yes, there are plenty of young and poor and uneducated men that become radicalized, but there are also older people that get radicalized. Women get radicalized. Highly educated people get radicalized. Rich people get radicalized. Does the name Bin Laden ring a bell in that regard? In Pakistan, there are many middle-class radicals who rose to top positions. For instance, within the Pakistani Taliban, all of the top TTP leaders over the years have been members of the middle class. They've been former journalists, former Air Force pilots, former gym trainers. Now, these were not dirt poor individuals. They were working class. They were middle class. And it's the same, for instance, with the foot soldiers, with some of the foot soldiers of the Lashkar-e-Taiba. And really, to provide one of the most recent and timely examples, and one that's unfortunately very close to home for me, if you look at the range of radicals that stormed the US Capitol just over a year ago, and yes, those people were radicalized, you see that, yes, many of them were low down on the socioeconomic ladder, but many others were CEOs of major companies, like tech firms. Some of them were legislators, some were police officers. There were even a few Olympic athletes that stormed the Capitol. So a wide variety of people that have been radicalized. My point here is that when it comes to making judgments about radicalization, I think it's important that we be cautious and acknowledge that there is so much that we still don't know about it. So with that very verbose caveat out of the way, I'll just offer some brief thoughts about how I see the current state of radicalization in South Asia. And I should say that my definition of radicalization is quite broad. It refers to a process where someone comes to embrace extreme ideas and goals, and often with a willingness to act on them violently. So I'll just highlight a few current trends that I think can give us a sense of where things stand with radicalization in South Asia. One, which was, I believe, addressed by the keynote speaker earlier, is the Taliban takeover last August in Afghanistan. For me, one of the key questions coming out of that is, will that seminal event, the Taliban takeover, will that produce new radicalizations? Or will it be more a case of galvanizing and inspiring existing radicals? So the Taliban victory has certainly had an intoxicating effect on Islamist terrorists of various stripes, as well as on other groups that are Islamist and hardline, but not terrorist organizations. So groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, these are groups that call for the establishment of a global caliphate without the use of violence. So why this intoxicating effect on all of these radicals and hardliners? I think there are various reasons. One is that most of the Islamist terror groups in South Asia, and especially in the Afghanistan-Pakistan region, have deep ties to the Taliban. This is especially the case with the TTP, a group with many members who previously fought in Afghanistan alongside the Taliban, and it's a group with senior leaders who were previously part of the Taliban, including the Haqqani network. Baitullah Masood, the very first supreme leader of the TTP, had at one point been a member of the Haqqani network. So there are very clear linkages between the two Talibans. The TTP increased its attacks in Pakistan after the Taliban takeover. That's very clear and has been chronicled in a lot of data from a lot of places. But other groups with ties to the Taliban, like LET and Jaish-e-Mohammed, they stand to be emboldened too, and especially with the Taliban having stated, after it retook power, that it will champion the cause of Kashmiri Muslims. Now, the Taliban pre-takeover didn't say all that much publicly about Kashmir. So this is pretty significant that it came out and made that statement soon after taking over, and I think could have an intoxicating effect on some of these groups that always have Kashmir in their crosshairs. A second reason why the Taliban victory has emboldened so many existing radicals is that victory achieved not one, but two of the core fundamental goals of Islamist terrorists. It expelled foreign military forces from Muslim soil in the minds of the Taliban, and it removed what they viewed as a US puppet regime, the Ghani government. So these are the issues that galvanize, and to see both goals achieved in a span of less than 2 weeks, the takeover and also the expulsion of foreign military forces, that really is a very big deal. The key question is, or a key question here, is whether the Taliban victory will lead to new radicalizations. And I think there's several areas to watch on this front. One, which is tough to monitor on some levels, is if existing Islamist terror groups see an upsurge in new members joining these groups and are inspired to do what the Taliban did in Afghanistan. And another somewhat related area to watch lies with the foreign fighter phenomenon. Will we see people from the region and the world flock to Afghanistan, inspired and radicalized by the Taliban victory, and keen to travel there, to join forces with groups there, or inspired to go there to get training and then return to their home countries to carry out attacks, or inspired to simply go there to Afghanistan to live in the Taliban's emirates? And I think the key countries in South Asia to watch in this context include Pakistan, which of course has sent many fighters to Afghanistan in the past, but also Bangladesh. There's a long legacy of Bangladeshis going to Afghanistan and returning home to operate in jihadist groups. Bangladeshi jihadist online spaces were really buzzing with excitement after the Taliban takeover. Maldives is an interesting case. It has a radicalization problem, and it has had the highest number of people per capita of any country in the world who have become foreign fighters over the last few years. This is according to the data tabulated by the Sufan group. Now, a second key factor in this radicalization story is what I would describe as religious majoritarianism. Put simply, one of the main themes across South Asia in recent years has been the increasingly extreme and violent expressions of religious majoritarianism. And certainly, one of the most prominent examples is the rise and success of the Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, TLP, which I believe was mentioned earlier, this being the Islamist party that calls for all blasphemers to be executed, advocates for violence against religious minorities, and uses violence in its protests. It enjoys considerable levels of support among the Pakistani working and middle classes, in great part because its position on blasphemy is supported by many Pakistanis. TLP emerged from one of the bigger triggers for radicalization in recent Pakistani history, that being the execution by the Pakistani government of Mumtaz Qadri. Of course, this was the person who assassinated Salman Taseer for his defense of for his opposition to the blasphemy laws a decade ago. TLP is also significant because it reflects the recent surge in radicalism from Barelvis, again, much of it driven by support for TLP's position on blasphemy. And I would also point to the actions of a group like Hafizat-e-Islam in Bangladesh. It's a similar, albeit much older, group than TLP in Pakistan. It mobilizes in very large numbers. It rails against any policies or actions that it deems a threat to Islam. Its prominence grew last year when, as I know all of you would remember, it staged anti-India and anti-Hindu protests in Bangladesh when Prime Minister Modi was visiting Bangladesh. Now, a major difference between TLP and Hafizat is how the state responds to them. So Dhaka, after initially appeasing Hafizat for a number of years, cracked down hard on the group after the anti-Modi protests. Many of its top leaders were put behind bars. Now, Islamabad, on the other hand, has not just appeased TLP, it has sought to incorporate the group into the political mainstream. More on this in a bit. Both of these state responses, I would argue, however, can actually increase the likelihood of more radicalizations, even though each government took a very different approach. In Bangladesh, the government there, by cracking down hard on Hafizat, risks radicalizing new generations of Muslims who sympathize with Hafizat's causes. And in Pakistan, by conciliating with TLP, you encourage people to bring nasty, radical ideas into the political mainstream. And that, in turn, can provide bigger platforms that could encourage more radicalizations. But the story of religious majoritarianism is region-wide. I think this is really important to remember the other cases here. In Sri Lanka and in Myanmar, radical Buddhist monks have preached hate and violence against religious minorities. There have been cases of Hindu temples in northeast Sri Lanka being destroyed and replaced by Buddhist temples. And of course, as Tara had mentioned earlier, we're seeing this story play out in India too. A case where there is hate speech and also sometimes acts of violence against religious minorities. And you know, the case, the example was mentioned earlier, this horrific case of speakers openly calling for ethnic cleansing against Muslims and other religious minorities in India. To resort to that type of hateful speech, one must be radicalized. So this is a manifestation of radicalization as well. To wrap up, just a few words on the accelerants of radicalization in today's South Asia, as I see them. They're both old and new. One of the old accelerants is laws, the legal context, and attached to that, quite frankly, is the colonial vestiges, so to speak. Colonial era laws continue to be exploited by state and society alike in many countries across the region to serve the goals of radicals. And I think we could look at the blasphemy laws in a number of countries, in Pakistan for sure, but other countries that illustrate that. Education is clearly another old accelerant, if not a trigger, for the radicalizations playing out. You have cases in many educational resources, including textbooks, that preach the type of exclusionary, divisive type of ideologies that give expression to majoritarianism. The role of the state can also be a key accelerant of radicalization, and this role varies across the region. On one hand, in Myanmar, you have a military that literally carries out ethnic cleansing against Rohingya Muslims, and that targets Christians, especially recently. And this certainly has a galvanizing impact on the likes of, I hope I pronounce his name right, Ashin Warathu, who is a notorious anti-Muslim monk with a large legion of followers. And in fact, Warathu has strongly pro-military views in Myanmar, and the Myanmar military released him from prison after its coup some time ago. Warathu had been imprisoned for inciting violence against the previous civilian government. And he laces his anti-Muslim rhetoric with strong expressions of nationalism, and that reflects what is often an ugly brew of toxic nationalism and religious majoritarianism in the region. Also, in terms of the role of the state as an accelerant of radicalization, Pakistan continues to enable radicalism, not just by continuing to harbor ties to some terror groups, but also by appeasing and giving in to Islamist hardliners like TLP. So after TLP's most recent standoff with the Pakistani state, Islamabad, Pakistan allowed the TLP to contest elections, even though it had been a banned party beforehand. This will give TLP more platforms to spout its ugly ideas and more opportunities to draw in more support. Now in India, here what's concerning is what I would describe as the silence of the state. So I would actually differ a bit from what Tara had said earlier in terms of what happened after that terrible hate conference, as it was called some weeks ago. What struck me was how quiet top officials were within the ruling party and within the government. And so when you have people like those at that conference that whip up religious hatred to that extent, to the point of inciting to genocide, and there's no formal response or reaction from the very top, that's empowering for the radicals that resort to that type of hatred. Finally, a new or newer type of accelerant and possible trigger for radicalization is the phenomenon of social media. This is critical. You have a perfect storm here in South Asia, large young populations, many of them burdened by poverty and lack of education, major advances in urbanization and broader internet penetration, resulting in more people able to access social media. And then there's social media itself, a powerful means of rapidly spreading radical ideas and images to many people, and with relatively little regulation. So no wonder the younger terror groups like ISIS became so adept with using social media as a recruitment and radicalization tool. They understood the benefits there. Radical organizations have strong presences on social media, and while some of them and some of their leaders are shut down on the big platforms like Twitter, they can pop up elsewhere on other platforms with different accounts or in more secure programs like WhatsApp and especially platforms like Telegram. So I'll end there. There's a combination, to sum up, there's a combination of old and new factors driving radicalization and radicalization risks within the region. And these factors, unfortunately, are unlikely to abate anytime soon. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kugelman. I think very well made points. First, your basic question, which perhaps will come again and again to all the audience here and also the other experts. That is, will Taliban produce new radicalization? I think that has to be researched much more. And in times to come, I think we will see different or many more manifestations of this particular problem, which South Asia has to bear with, or South Asia has to deal with. And the other component you spoke about is the role of the state, where you see a state like Pakistan being an enabling state for radicalization and terrorism, whereas you see a state like India not being able to question, or the top echelon, or the state apparatus not making enough comments, or trying to take any decisions on that one, also becomes very, very critical. When there are no very clear responses, it also becomes critical for the rise of radicalization. I think very well taken points, and I'm sure there will be quite a number of good questions. I already see there are questions on the Shia militia, to a lot of other things, which we will be taking up in the question hour. Now I'll move on to the next speaker, a very, very senior and a dear friend, Sri Pratap Heblikar. PM Heblikar retired as a Special Secretary, Government of India, in September 2010 after over 38 years of service. Is currently managing trustee, Institute of Contemporary Studies, Bangalore, a not-for-profit think tank specializing in security and strategic affairs. He was a visiting professor at the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, Manipal Academy of Higher Education, to which I belong to, and formerly an adjunct faculty, International Security and Strategic Studies at the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore. Besides, he was associated with Christ University, Bangalore, as well as St. Joseph's College to develop a new approach to studying contemporary developments. He was a member of the Asia Center Bangalore-based institution. He's also a life member of the United Service Institution, New Delhi. In April 2015, he was appointed as a director on the board of Singapore-based Asian Dialogue Society. He's also on the board of a Bangalore-based IT company, which specializes inter alia in providing training and offers solutions for cybersecurity, blockchain technology, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, and machine learning. More than anything, there are a number of young scholars in this country who have felt inspired by Sri Heblikar. We've all looked up to him, the type of insights that he brings in, and the vast knowledge that he spreads across in different places, and the humility that he brings in as a personality. So over to you, sir. It's a pleasure to have you here. Next 15 minutes to you.
Thank you, Nanda. It was great seeing you on the screen again. And very good morning to my friends who are on the screen and those who are participating at today's presentation. Let me at the outset thank Abhinav for the invitation and to Usana's Foundation for having undertaken this important event, especially in the backdrop of what happened in Afghanistan about several months ago. I think both are equally connected, and we need to see how we can maximize the expertise we have today to draw up a roadmap for the future. And as I say that even this has been said earlier by my predecessor speakers, and yesterday, Afghanistan and Pakistan will continue to remain centers of concern for us in the region for many reasons, good or unstated, and we need to prepare accordingly. And I think we could also look at a scenario where there could be deep instability in Afghanistan if they are not able to come to terms with the situation that exists. So be that it may, I will want to talk about the changing face of radicalization, which I think is a very important milestone on this roadmap. And as I say, it is my belief that there is no universal definition of radicalization, except the fact that it represents the views of an individual or groups of individuals opposed to promoting a certain line of action to achieve its or his or her objective. So there are, today, there are no definitions that we can bring to the table how we describe this particular term. There are also, understandably, there is no single solution how to deal with this. So there are many areas where radicalization could become one of the many in the lexicon of anti-state activities, so that we need to understand what is happening. But I think there is a very serious attempt in India, in New Delhi, the Bureau of Police Research and Development, a think tank under the Ministry of Home Affairs, has been tasked to create a document that talks about the status of radicalization in India and exploratory study of prevention and remedies. What does this exactly mean? It means that if we need to have a law against radicalization, we need to understand its many manifestations and how that will sit with the four corners of the criminal jurisprudence in India, the Indian penal laws, and even if it has to be brought under the much discussed UAPA. So, if you talk about radicalization, you talk about different religious processes, religious faiths coming in, people who are trying to drive this. So, there is a whole host of discussion that is necessary to understand what radicalization is all about. But I think there are two issues. One is, like has been rightly said by the previous speaker, there needs to be a national consensus on how you deal with this situation. And also, there has to be a regional cooperation in doing this. I can speak from an Indian point of view because right since 1948, when Pakistan tried to annex Kashmir, till today, India's bilateral relations have been held hostage. Right from 1950, when China annexed Tibet and shortened the border between India and China to what was Tibet earlier, we continue to look at the dangers of the China's relationship with India. So I think these two have always been the guiding factor, and they have brought together with them various other concerns. For example, we talk about insurgency, which started in Nagaland in 55, continues in some form or the other today in the Northeast. Then you have militancy, which we saw happening in Punjab and in Kashmir. Then you have political violence, which we saw in parts of the country where people took law into their own hands because they did not have adequate response from the local governments. Then you have political extremism. Talk about the left-wing extremism in the states in central India, where the Maoists are trying to create for themselves their own areas of influence, or Naxalbari, which was another aspect of militancy. Then the fourth one was, you talked about radicalization. You talked about areas where people were begun to be brought to a point where their thinking would have been changed by several methods. Last but not the least, it was terrorism that became the mainstay of all anti-state activities. The difference between the first four and terrorism being that in terrorism, the civilian population and property became collateral damage. Civilians were targeted because the anti-national elements or the anti-state elements wanted to put pressure on the authorities to come to a negotiating table or to come about giving expressions to the demands. So I think terrorism has now become the single most aspect that we need to understand. And I would say that radicalism or radicalization is one important aspect of terrorism. It did not happen in the other four. For example, when we talk about militancy, all of you would recall the case of Rosa Banks in the US, an elderly lady of black color who refused to give up a seat to a white man on his demand. And so that came to be known as a form of militancy, that one person stood up for his or her right. So we have different expressions of insurgency, of extremism, of political violence. So I think we need to understand very clearly that what we talk about terrorism today in India is where a civilian population is going to be collateral damage, and where expressions of anti-government activities, we'll see more civilians becoming victims of this. I think we have to make this difference, and I have always advocated the fact that when we use the word terrorism, please be extremely careful, because we do not want to convey the wrong impression. India today, fortunately, except for very few cases, terrorism does not exist in the manner it has been seen in our neighboring countries, or having been dealt with by our neighboring countries in a different manner. When we talk about radicalization and the others which come under its umbrella, we also need to understand that the nature of India's judiciary, the nature of India's civil service has been such, even political governance, that we have hesitated. We have not used the military in direct aid in such kind of operations. The last time India did this was in May 1966, when the Indian Air Force was employed only once in the earlier stages of the MNF insurgency in the Lushai Hills district of Assam, now Mizoram. So I think we need to understand that as a responsible democracy where we have very strong judiciary and where accountability exists, we will not be able to take the kind of actions that our neighboring countries have done. Helicopter gunships have been used, artillery has been used, tanks have been used, and things like this. So I think that's where the major difference is that we need to bring to the back of our mind. The other thing which we also need to understand that radicalization has different meanings in different countries. For example, like what the previous speaker very rightly mentioned, look at Myanmar. Following the army takeover in February 2021, and 6 months down the road till August, September, the civil society was no longer what it was considered to be a docile one. It had taken law into its own hands. And it had begun to look at the military as the primal enemy of democracy in the country. Even the ethnic armed organizations, 16 of them, who had swapped arms for peace in the mid-80s, told the military government that they were not ready to talk to them till they withdrew to the barracks and restored situation prior to, or as on 30th of January, the 31st of January 2021. The number of deaths that have occurred in the attacks when the students have been radicalized to such an extent that they have begun to take proactive measures, engaging the military in direct action. So I understand that there are over 450 or 460 incidents where the students and the civilian population have been, in the words, radicalized in the sense that the military has become a hate of. They want to create as much collateral damage on the military as possible. And in that, I think there are no holds barred. Over 200 odd government employees or government supporters have been assassinated. Plus, there have been growing incidents of arson in that country. So I think what you look at is radicalization has also its own meaning. It does not have the traditional meaning as we have seen. And in fact, there is no way that we can say that what is happening in Myanmar is terrorism or it's counterinsurgency operation of the government. It is where radicalization has become very, very big, larger than life. For example, what the previous speaker mentioned about U Viratu, a darling of the military, when he was released last year, he was so appalled by what the military had done that he refused to support the military in its activity. He was told by the military that they needed his vast experience and his charisma to bring the clergy, the monks, to a point where they could support the military. It didn't happen. U Viratu is not, I understand, in a position to support the military in any of its activities. Then you look at the radicalization of the Rohingyas. Having been denied their natural rights since 1988 till now, they are going to become a huge headache for not only for Myanmar, but for the host country and for India as well. So radicalization has different meanings, and people of this particular variety are going to receive or may have been receiving help from Pakistan. So the other thing which I had wanted to focus attention is that India has substantial experience in dealing with all forms of anti-state activities, right from insurgency, militancy, political extremism, radicalism, and terrorism, that it has become a bulwark of the spread of these from the west to the east and to Southeast Asia and onwards. I think given our own particular um, restrictions we have, we need to understand that the experience we have gained, the expertise available will be very, very useful to those who need to, coalesce with India and to share their experience with India. And I think India has all the trappings of becoming the regional center to look at some of these activities. Last but not the least, I'm not an expert of either Pakistan or on Afghanistan, considering all the various streams or undercurrents that exist. But I think there is a feeling that I have that the longer the political dispensation in power, the Taliban, relies on its untrained militia, it's going to face a problem in the long run. You cannot convert a organization like this into a military because it is just not possible. And how long that this situation is going to be looked at in Afghanistan remains to be seen. There is one example when the LTT, even Prabhakaran, turned the LTT into a so-called regular army. The Sri Lankan army was able to get the best of the LTT in the shortest possible time in the period 2008-2009. So I think as long as you have instability in Afghanistan, where the government is going to be preoccupied with its own safety and security, I think that we need to build our own, strength and synergies that are important in this interim period. I don't think the Taliban has gotten over its initial problems. I think it will be a little more time that it will take to come to terms with the realities. Not the least, radicalization in its many forms will remain a major national security challenge, especially in a country like India, where law and order is a subject to the state government, and the central government steps in when as aid to civil power or at a last resort. So I think there is a greater need for the state governments to become more proactive in dealing with these subjects. And state governments also need to understand that universities, educational institutions in these areas need to focus on some of these aspects in a very, very clear manner. And I think the next 3-4 years, peninsular India is going to see more such, tremors taking place, because peninsular India has not seen the kind of violence that Punjab, J&K, and the northeast region of India or UP have seen in the past. So I think this is an area that we need to focus, and I'm sure that some of our educational institutions, our think tanks, or academics will be able to focus their attention and to ensure that we have solutions that could be used in a very, very proactive manner. I think with these words, I will stop here, take a pause. We'll address the questions as they happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heblikar sir, for sharing your thoughts and especially your strategic forecast on what's going to happen in the future regarding the peninsular India and the other parts of the country, okay? Especially with reference to the radicalization trends. Now I'll invite Professor Arabinda Acharya. I'll just briefly introduce him. Since September 2021, Arabinda Acharya has been visiting professor XIM University, Bhubaneswar, India. Before that, Acharya was associate professor and senior research advisor at the Ramadan Academy in Abu Dhabi. After working with the College of International Security Affairs, National Defense University in the USA, and the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. Acharya's area of specialization include regionalism and human security, political violence and terrorism, maritime security, and cyber security. Acharya has published 7 books, including South China Sea, Developments and Implications for Freedom of Navigation, Wither Southeast Asia, Terrorism, 10 years after 9/11, Rethinking the Jihadist Threat, Targeting Terrorist Financing, International Cooperation, and New Regimes. Now, over to you, Acharya sir. I think you are on mute, sir. You'll have to unmute yourself. You are on mute, Dr. Acharya. Please unmute yourself. Sir, I request you to unmute yourself. Yes. Now you can speak. I think it shows you're not on mute now. Sir, we can't hear you. Sir, we can't hear you. Professor Acharya, we cannot hear you. Can you hear us? Can you hear me? But please unmute yourself. We can't hear you. There is some technical issue on your side. Either you're using headphones. Akshay, can you help? Sir, will you please log out and log in again? Dr. Acharya, please log out and log in again. Yes, Dr. Acharya, can you hear me? We still can't hear you.
So what we can do is that as Dr. Acharya he can join from his phone. Meanwhile, we can take few questions because I think his PC is not, the audio is not working there.
Okay, so Dr. Acharya, can you log in from your phone? I think it should work from your phone.
So you can log in from your phone, and what you can do is that you can switch off your camera there. So that is the problem.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Hello.
Yeah, that now it's okay. I'm sorry.
Yes, it's fine. It's fine. Perfectly fine. Loud and clear.
I was going to use my PowerPoint presentation. I will rather use it as a background reading. Okay. Sorry about this. Just to let you know that I was telling, I'm grateful to Mr. Abhinav and the foundation to getting me invited to this conference, which I find very interesting and overreaching, particularly in a time when we are having difficulties and from multifarious fronts, terrorism not being the least. So what I'm going to do is to tell you about, let me tell you, I have spent more than 20 years now outside of South Asia, but it doesn't mean that I have no connections with South Asia. I have been writing, and my latest book, which is in print now, is a caliphate in South Asia. I am trying to examine whether South Asia holds the prospects of a caliphate, given the narratives and attempts by groups like ISIS or Islamic State or Daesh in the region, and also the previous attempts by Al Qaeda. Talk about a lot, and most probably after few years, almost 20 years of fighting the so-called jihadism in Afghanistan or in Syria or Iraq, we have lost focus on those things. They have changed, mutated, and now appearing in different forms. 1990s, 2000s, there was much hue and cry about Al Qaeda, and then it was also about the Islamic State or Daesh. I particularly do not like to call it Islamic State, even though they call themselves Islamic State. I think that if we call them Islamic State, they are getting the legitimacy there from the communities that they are seeking to. Daesh is better or any other name. All these things happen due to two reasons. One is explosion of ideas and dissemination of the same ideas in media, especially in the internet and now social media. And these ideas are not necessarily moderate ideas. They are radical ideas. Ideas about exploitations by the West against the Muslim communities as a whole, and so on. There are so many explanations. Anyway, then also another key factor which we keep losing sight of is loss of orientation by these key groups, especially Al Qaeda after 9/11. Responses by the United States and the world as a whole. The organization lost its assets, its base, fighters, leaders, so much so that it is to return itself as an organization. Same happened also with ISIS. So what was the outcome? This decline of terrorist organization created conditions, removed the conditions necessary for groups to survive, to remain so for long. Here, actually, we got some other alternatives by the scholars in the jihadist world. One of them was Mustafa Al-Suri, who talked about Nizam La Tanzim, that means system, not organization. He highlighted need for a model or a framework in the place of organization. This will be extreme, there will be extreme decentralization, but the system will be bound together by a common aim and common program and self-education. That is coming from the ideology which is the basis of radicalization now. What is this ideology? And I define it in two ways. One is this ideology is religiously transcendent, and highlighting aspect of a God's nature and power which is wholly independent of the material universe, beyond all physical laws. And this is not exclusive to the Muslim world. It's inherent in all religions. Christianity, for example, transcendence is implied by God's omnipresence. Hinduism, God as the Nirguna Brahmana, God without attributes, transcendence being absolute. Islam, Tawheed, the act of believing and affirming that Allah is one and unique. Second aspect is what we call eschatological. Theology concerned with the final events of the history of the world or mankind, belief concerning death, the end of the world, or ultimate destiny of humankind. Again, it's common to most religions. Christianity, we are talking about rapture these days. Hinduism, Kalki Avatar, or end of Kali Yuga, era of conflicts, and beginning of Satya Yuga. Buddhism, Ramsunikyo group in Japan. Islam, end times battle, which became the mantra or the key motivating factor for Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. Ideology also is critical to understanding radicalization in this context. Is very important to fight the battle. But there is, as my previous speakers have highlighted, there is no uniform explanation about the same. I have been doing research on radicalization for almost 10 years now. I have never seen any unanimity among agencies, governments, or countries in trying to find a common understanding of radicalization. That means how it takes place, why people get radicalized, all these questions which Mr. Heblikar was explaining and also our previous speakers highlighted. But there are broadly two understandings of the radicalization process. One is process-based explanations, believing that radicalization is inevitable in respect of certain communities. It can be top-down, in which case there will be external radicalizer like an imam or a scholar in the Islamic school, or bottoms-up, like self-initiated, what we call homegrown jihadists. It's a linear and it's a relationship and a precursor to terrorism in almost all cases. There are also cause-based explanations. Inevitable if certain core or root conditions are present. Means radicalism will happen if certain core or root conditions are present, and we have seen it in many cases in Southeast Asian context and in some parts of India also, South Asia. But as pointed out earlier, predisposition to radicalization vary in degree and intensity, nature of reactions to constructed grievances, since socio-political contexts vary. And then there is a question of localization, which is like the narrative that inspires Middle East radicals doesn't get to Indian Muslims in the same way that it comes because of local culture, identities and values, social, political and systemic filters, and country-specific conditions like constitutional provisions, the message gets significantly diluted. So we cannot assume that whatever message is coming from Middle East or Arabic radicals is going to be accepted in the same way as they perceived in Pakistan or in India or in other parts of the world. So this is explained by incongruence between the ideologies of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, or Islamic State and local groups. You look at groups in Southeast Asia particularly, these groups do understand Al-Qaeda's ideology. Some want to follow ISIS ideology, but they do not make it their fighting goal. I have seen it almost in all countries of Southeast Asia. like Indonesia or Philippines and southern Thailand, there is no desire to have a pan-Islamic caliphate type thing in those countries when they started their fights. They still want to have common roots, address common grievances. There are agreement on broader aspects of global jihad, but remain firmly grounded in local issues. That is why we have something called the debate called global and local objectives, or perception about the far and the near enemy. Ground reality is Al-Qaeda dominated from 1990s to 2014. Now it is Al-Qaeda and ISIS, both in fierce competition for leadership of the Muslim world. Al-Qaeda to raise the flag of jihad, return of the Islamic rule, and empowering the Sharia of Allah, vis-a-vis Islamic State and its so-called Islamic State, the territorial state with wilayats, branches. However, due to technological advancements and ownership of a lot of money, Islamic State could manage to project united Islamic fronts in the most of the regions in the world. Now both reduced in terms of strength, leadership, fighters, ability and resources and outreach. But they are reviving in some parts of the world, and South Asia is not an exception. If you remember September 2014 declaration by Aiman al-Zawahiri, headed all jihad in Indian subcontinent to establish a Islamic caliphate in Indian subcontinent, to raise the flag of jihad, return the Islamic rule, empower Sharia, all these things are there. And that so was done as a tactic to reinforce Al-Qaeda Taliban alliance against and claiming to be the leadership of the global Muslim community vis-a-vis the Islamic State. But this is not new. If you look at Lashkar-e-Toiba's constitutional provisions of their mandate, Hafiz Saeed has made it very clear. Ghazwe is inevitable. That means it includes Bangladesh, it includes Bhutan, it includes Sri Lanka and Maldives. So this concept is old and continues to persist. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to tell you that South Asia may have been coming under the insidious influence of radicalization of the variety of Salafist and other groups, but it's not going to be that intense as in Pakistan or intense in each country of the region. It may not be as intense as in Pakistan, or Sri Lanka may have some radicalization which manifests now, which is the Easter Sunday bombing, but it is not going to be universally accepted, and it will not go on for long. I will come back to that. But now I want to highlight one particular aspect which we probably have not discussed, is pandemic and radicalization. How this pandemic has affected terrorist groups' efforts to radicalize. Yes, sir. How many minutes?
Sir, ये हमें नहीं दिखा था, sir.
Most groups
about 5 to 7 minutes.
Although we were on, we were looking at it, sir. जब हमें message मिला था, but we could not see it, sir.
Somebody is speaking from the background, so should I continue? Yes. Hello? Hello? Hello?
You can continue.
Can you hear me? Hello?
You can continue.
We can hear you, sir. We can hear you.
Yeah, but I heard somebody telling from the background. Anyway, I just want to highlight in few lines the impact of pandemic. Most groups view pandemic as an opportunity, but recruitment activities reduced in open and in other offline settings because of increasing vigilance on the road and streets, and also monitoring of the internet. There is discontent against leaders of the groups to failure to protect their members, but there is reduced visibility for their actions, less media coverage, because media is definitely overall reporting pandemic specific issues. So overall reduction of terrorist activities in urban areas. Not so much in ungoverned territories, of course, or weak states like sub-Saharan Africa. Rise in far-right terrorism also, Europe, North America, and Oceania because of the extreme radicalization in the internet. So these are all the consequences of preventive measures like lockdowns. The groups are trying to exploit moderate political protests to spread extremist narratives, expand support base, recruit new members, mostly through online. So young are particularly vulnerable at this time because they have more time to surf the web due to stay-at-home, school closures, loss of employment, and peer deprivation issues. And that is why there are also new methods of financing. I'm not going to get into details, but if you have seen in Indian context, for example, the cyber has increased many, specifically in cyber domain to exploit money or donations. So my conclusion will be in my impact people, all the Muslims in similar manner. Again, my projection is Al-Qaeda brand of jihad has gone beyond sell by date. It has expired. Means it is now no more so alluring as it used to be. Islamic State could have immediate appeal, which we have seen in many parts of South Asia, but these would also have a short shelf life. Need to remain vigilant, of course, about other entities like Muslim Brotherhood and the local surrogates, which are spreading their tentacles in many parts of Southeast Asia, South Asia, specifically in India and Sri Lanka and Maldives. I just want to conclude with a comment on our response, actually. Countries in the region have to remain prepared to fight the threat of radicalization for a long time. There is no doubt about it. But the cooperation among the countries in South Asia remains piecemeal, and we know the historical reasons for that. So I would like to say there will be radicalization. We will be fighting radicalization, which is the extremism, which is the precursor of terrorism in the world. But we do not know whether we are prepared for that for a long time. Thank you very much. I'm sorry about the technical issues.
No worries, sir. Thank you so much for your thoughts. Thank you so much, sir. So now we'll be taking question and answers, but we don't have a lot of time as our next session was about to begin at 11, but still we'll have about 10 to 12 minutes for taking the questions. And I'll take a very few questions, I think. Yes, so we have a question. This looks an interesting question. This is from Ambika Bhargav. I would also request our honorable speakers to shed some light on the Shia militia of current Iranian extremist regime dominating the parts of Middle East and Asia, especially its attitude towards Israel, Kurdistan, Baloch areas, and Iran's overall attitude on nuclear leadership in sync with North Korea and Pakistan. Although, except for Iran's exclamations threats post General Qasim's martyrdom, everyone mostly has a soft vision and see it as a peaceful nation. Maybe Michael, you or Tara would like to take up this. Please feel free. I mean, it's addressed to all the speakers. You know. Pratap sir had to leave because he had to see the doctor, but we have 3 speakers left, so feel free.
Yeah. I can briefly respond. I'm not sure completely if the question relates to the Iranian government or to the militias that it sponsors, such as the Fatma Brigade. I guess I could refer to the latter. I think that is a significant issue. If we talk about the different radical groups and the terrorist groups in the region, these Iranian groups are not ones that come to mind the most, but it is notable that Tehran has cultivated some militias mainly comprised of Shias, including Hazaras from Pakistan and Afghanistan, that have been deployed to help serve Iranian interests in different parts of the Middle East, particularly Syria. But I don't think that we should overstate the clout of these groups, and I'm not sure, at least in terms of the ones that comprise Afghan Shias, if those groups are even constituted, if they're still constituted at this point. But it certainly is an asset that Iran has, for sure, and something that presumably could be reconstituted if it feels that that would serve the goals of Iran, particularly vis-a-vis Afghanistan. That we've seen just with the events of the last 24 hours that Iran clearly wants to try to engage with the Taliban to the extent that it can, even if it's not going to recognize it, even if it's not going to recognize the Taliban government anytime soon.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you. Dr. Tara, would you like to answer this question?
No, I'd like to take on some of the questions which are addressed to me. So I'll just quickly go over that. One is, I think I've been accused of political correctness, which I find very surprising because I'm anything but politically correct. No, my point was that, see, there are a lot of academics, I think, in this group. My point is look at the data, because there is an overwhelming amount of disinformation going on. You've just learned how Facebook sort of interferes with your opinion process. You've learned how social media is dealt with by Twitter. So you're constantly bombarded by this stuff from TV. So you have to be very, very careful what you are looking at. So that's why I said go to the data. So there is no doubt at all that under this, especially the present BJP government, there is not the government, there is a lot of, like, as Michael said, there are these conferences taking place, which to me is shocking. I mean, I can't imagine such a thing happening. But what I also said is that there is a bunch of other things taking place. If you listen to, and I have listened to it, Friday sermons from some of the mosques in Kashmir, Friday sermons from certain states, which I won't mention. Okay, it's okay to mention them. In Kerala and in Karnataka, all this I have seen. It is shocking. So what if you look at only one side of this debate, then you're not getting a correct picture. There is an action reaction. This whole universe is built on cause and effect. If A happens, B will follow. So that is what you need to look at. This is not political correctness. I'm saying look carefully at the data. The data doesn't exist as of now. You're looking at it through one lens. Yes, it is there. That doesn't at all. Again, I'm saying there is not the slightest question that in Hinduism, there is no room for radicalism. Not the Hinduism that I know. So I'll stop with that. Second is the PFI. There was a question on the PFI. Yeah, it's a very, very influential organization, shall we say. It has its links into various political parties. It has its links abroad. So my concern is, I'll just tell you one quick incident which happened, which Michael also might be interested in. There was a match where the Indian cricket team lost, and there was a social media sort of a blast against a cricketer who happened to be Muslim in the Indian team. We traced that back and looked at the original thing. It was actually one tweet by a person which was magnified by certain people and then picked up by influencers. It's a long story, but I'm trying to just shorten this. So actually what happened is that man was never insulted at all, but it was created on social media and a whole campaign was unleashed. It reached the Washington Post. It reached it was picked up by the New York Times. Some of our opinion leaders took it up on an incident which didn't happen. So that's why I'm saying, please be careful of data. Anything that you use, check up, whether it is Hindu radicalism, Muslim radicalism, anything that you find, you have to be careful. That's all. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tara. Professor Acharya, would you have some last comments on any of the questions raised? Professor Acharya? Okay, no worries. So I think it's time we close this first session, and I would like to thank all the esteemed panelists and participants for joining us today. Dr. Tara and my dear friend Michael, who has been a great support to Usana's Foundation right from the beginning. So I guess it's your third or fourth panel with Usana's Foundation, and we look forward to engaging you more and more, even with the offline events in the future once the corona vanishes. And Dr. Tara, you also, we look forward to inviting you more often. Professor Acharya, thank you so much for your enlightening thoughts. And Heblikar sir has gone. He was not well, but still he joined. My thanks to him also.